Good morning. This is Rich Morrison, and this is my latest edition of the Thinking Cap. Wanted to spend a few minutes this morning talking about ECO once again and giving you a little bit of an update from what we talked about 2 or 3 weeks ago. The markets have moved a little bit. That's a big positive for everyone involved. And so let's dig in to what we're talking about here this morning. Of course, if you're not familiar with ECO, it's enhanced coverage option. ECO was developed back in 2021, I believe was our first year. NAU Country, along with another organization, we're at the forefront of putting this product together. We were looking to try to get a government supported program at 95% that was affordable to the farmer. And the big deal this year is that the government is going to pick up an extra part of the copay, I'm calling it. They've raised that copay from 44 to 65%. It's going to make ECO a lot more attractive to a lot more people on a lot more crops around the country. Why I want to update here this morning, if you haven't had a chance to look at my market report email letter at night, I've had this in here 2 or 3 times over the last week or so about different ways to market. And of course, we can look at just forward selling. And this was some suggestions I had put in on new crop corn the other day. The reason is you've got the relative strength index, stochastics, everything's moved into what I would consider overbought territory. So how do you protect yourself right now without just physically going and selling the bushels? I know people will sell a little bit. Nobody wants to get too far sold. Well, here were some suggestions. Number one was a minimum price contract, buying, selling, buying a call. Number two, just buying put options. Set a floor into the market, no obligation. Number three, buying the put, selling a call, taking a floor and a ceiling. Number four, a three-way option trade, which gets a little more interesting. If you're familiar with options, maybe this is something you might want to look at. But number five is the one we're talking about this morning, and that's utilizing crop insurance really as a put option. And that doesn't necessarily work when you're talking about 75 or 80% coverage, because when you multiply, the current prices by even 80%, on corn, for example, you're down below $4 a bushel. But when we're looking at a base price, and this was a day or so ago at 471, now I think we're up to 472. And if I multiply by that by 95%, and let's say we go into the year assuming that the yield isn't going to change, we're going to have an average crop in the county, which is what I usually do every year. The 95% of 471 gives me essentially a put option with a 447 strike price. So if the market December corn in the fall ends up below 447, then ECO would start to pay. We saw that happen here in many areas for 2024. We've yet to get the final county yields out, but we're pretty sure that that's going to be the case in a lot of places around the country this year where we had more than a 5% drop in the price. That's how I'm looking at utilizing ECO right now for 2025. Given this rally we've had, you go back a couple of months ago, looking pretty ugly. Now things have improved quite a bit. So let's kind of go through a little bit about ECO. For those of you new to ECO, ECO is a county-based product. It's especially good for producers that are better than the county or that track with the county. 95% means you only have to have a 5% loss in revenue. We've talked about the price side. It could be yield or it could be a combination. You have to have an individual policy to buy ECO. It doesn't have to be at a certain level. I know a guy that bought 50% RP coverage just to buy the ECO. ECO is not impacted by whatever you do at the FSA office, and that's a separate discussion, but I can take the PLC or the ARC program and still buy ECO because it's above any of those program triggers. But again, the blue light special this year is because Congress increased the copay from 44 to 65%. That's about a $10 additional discount on corn and about $6 cheaper on beans than what it was last year. So it's really going to bring a lot of new people to the table here this year looking at ECO. And where ECO fits, it's this green band across the top. You've got your individual coverage up to as high as 85%. You can add either SCO or ARC if you want to get up county coverage up to that 86% trigger. But ECO is that top end band and gets you up within a 5% deductible. And why does that matter this year? Well, if I look at our producer profitability matrix, which I developed this tool a couple of years ago, basically to be able to display ECO. And so if I look at what do I get for an 80% RP policy? Well, I use just a generic county with an APH on the farm at 200 bushels, 190 county yield. Said my expenses were $900 an acre to grow corn. If I buy an 80% RP policy with enterprise units, you can see that I can put a floor under my operation, but that floor is negative. Worst case scenario, I lose $163. Far cry from 2 years ago when we were at $6.50 corn. You could probably buy an 80% policy, guarantee a profit. What if I bump it to 85%? Well, my premium goes up, my floor goes up, but it's still, even at 85, it's not going to give me enough coverage to cover cost of production. So, what if I do a couple of things? Number one, I'm going to sign up for the County ARC program. But number two is I'm going to buy ECO from 86 to 95. My premium goes up. Now, I back my individual coverage to 80% because I think I can save enough money from 80 to 85 to pay for a lot of this ECO to get that trigger all the way to that 95% level. Oh, excuse me. And so doing that maybe not gets me enough dollars to cover my under all circumstances, but boy, it makes my picture look a lot better. And then I want to forward sell some corn this year. And with this rally, I said, what if I sell half my APH at $4.80 average, which is not that far above where we're at today? Now my picture looks a whole lot better than what we started out at. So I do think ECO is a major part of a plan that you're going to put together this year. It's not the whole plan, but it does get you that trigger at 95%. Add that in with your individual coverage and some marketing, and I think we can do pretty well here for this year. So just a few of the details. It uses all the same yields as the other county policies. Final area yields are released late in the spring, which means indemnities get paid in the early summer. They don't necessarily track with what your individual yields are, so always keep that in mind as well. But looking ahead to what could happen, well, let's start out with corn. I've got three different potential balance sheets here: 93.5 million, 94.6 million acres of corn. The top one up to 97.2. I think it's realistic to be in the middle here somewhere. This 94.6 is essentially flipping right back to where we were a year ago. I do think that's a realistic target. I'm not using as high a yield as what USDA is. I'm using 180 and a half, given that acreage number. Gives me total supply of corn, over 17 billion bushels. I'm a little bit friendly to demand, maybe with my numbers, maybe a little too friendly on exports. We'll see. But even under that scenario, you're pushing 2 billion bushel ending stocks. And if we do end up with 2 billion corn at the end of the year next year, I don't think we're probably going to be at 475 or 470 or 472 December corn futures in the fall. So that's part of the reason I like the idea of utilizing ECO. So here's where the market's at today. Markets have pushed up. We've got our base price running right now at 472 as I record this. Might be up another penny here this afternoon after the close. We'll see. But again, I think it's a great rally, great opportunity to take advantage of. If you haven't sold any new crop grain, take a look at that. Look at some of the other scenarios that I talked about with using options, but also look at ECO as basically a put option and taking advantage of the market where it's at today. Why do I also want to do that? Well, look at where the funds are at right now. The funds are holding as long a position as they've really ever held at this time of the year. We've had 5 times where the funds have been this long. This year, 21, 22, and then back in 2010, 2011. So I'm not saying tomorrow that the funds are going to liquidate their position, but I do think if you get into the growing season and you do get 94 or 95 million acres of corn planted and the crop gets off to a decent start, then you got people again talking 2 billion carryover. And so I could see a situation where as you get into summer, the funds liquidate like they typically do. That again, reason that I want to utilize this period to do some marketing as well as ECO. The other thing, if you look back at history, here we are base price today, right now averaging 472. We do have a pretty strong tendency to see the prices go down in the fall. You saw that in this window from 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, where we started out higher, ended up lower. That tends to be the case once we build stocks back up to a reasonable level. And that's kind of where we're at right now on corn. On soybeans, we do expect less acres of beans getting planted this year in lieu of more corn. I think the middle of that range is again 83.6 million, which is back to where we were just 2 years ago. Could end up seeing a few more bean acres or a few more total corn and bean acres this year, maybe because of less cotton in the Delta. So we'll see. But 83.6 with a trend line yield, pretty much keeps ending stocks about where we're at because I think we're expecting, even though a better crush number, probably a dip in the exports this coming year. I do think the bean market's going to basically boil down to whatever happens in the southern hemisphere. The U.S. numbers are not necessarily very bearish, but if Brazil adds more acres this fall, that's probably what the market will look at. So it's been a great rally for November bean futures. They're not quite to the point of corn. If you look at the RSI and stochastics, pretty neutral right at the moment. We're starting out right now today, 1058 on the price. Again, much better opportunity than we had 2 months ago. So I do think it's a good opportunity to utilize this program. The funds are still a little bit on the long side of beans. You can see they were just short about a year ago at this time, a big amount of beans. So lots, again, going to ride on what happens in the southern hemisphere. But a little bit like corn, you can see the tendency to be higher in the spring, lower in the fall. If you go back to 14, 15, 17, 18, maybe not quite as pronounced as what you see in corn, but last 2 years it's been the case, 3 years. You would have to think with the rally, not a bad time to be looking at locking something in. So this is how I look at ECO. It's kind of like the next rung on my ladder. I've got my bottom rungs that I do with multi-peril coverage. I utilize the farm program, probably the ARC on corn and beans to add another rung in the middle. Do I want to get a little closer to the roof? Or do I want to take a big step? That's, how big do I want my deductible to be? I think ECO allows me to get that as tight as I can get it. Also want to point out our worksheet that we've got, our SEO ECO indemnity worksheet for the agents that are on the call. Take a look at this. If you're a producer, ask your agent to look at it. But this walks you through how the claim or a potential payment is made, how the policy works. And so you can see at the top, we take our higher of the base price and the harvest price. I used an example here of the market goes down to 420 in the fall. We're going to take the higher times our APH to come up with our expected value of the crop. That's important. If your APH is higher than the county, you get a little more dollars from your policy. Then that number times my payment or my range, 9% band of coverage, that value of that band is $85 an acre. At the end of the year, we calculate the loss. We ended up with an 89% of our expected revenue because just of the drop in the price, which means we're going to collect on 6%, 95 down to 89. That ends up being 2/3 of that band. We're going to get a payment of about $57 an acre. So if you think that's realistic, we could go to 420 corn, then you're looking at getting a pretty huge sum of money back. The one thing I would point out, at 89% revenue, even at 85% RP, you're not going to get a payment if you have an average crop and corn goes to 420. At 80%, like I mentioned earlier, you're going to have to go sub $4 corn to get a payment under that situation. Also, page 2 of this matrix, or is the matrix here, you can make the numbers look whatever you want at the top and down the left-hand side on price and bushels. One thing about ECO, it does have the harvest price option included. So if the market goes up in the fall, let's say we have another 2012 situation in the Midwest and corn goes to 150 in my county, but the market goes to $6 plus, my payment's going to continue to go higher because we're going to recalculate the dollar value of that crop. So always keep that in mind as well. So, one alternative, we had producers do this last year. You can buy 95% trigger. You can buy less dollars of coverage. So, I can buy that down in 1% increments. If I go back here to the beginning of this right here, I can take this slide bar and drop it down to 50%, which means that my value under that case would be about $42 of that band of coverage. What that essentially means is for every dollar loss we have in the county, I get paid 50 cents. You can do that. It's going to cheapen your premium by 50%. It also means you get paid 50%. You can do any increment in between 50 and 100%. So with that, I encourage you to take a hard look at using ECO right now as a put option for both corn and soybeans for this year. In addition, it's going to give you bushel protection as well, anything that causes a 5% drop in the county revenue for the year. With that, thank you for listening. That's our blue light special. Thanks for listening to Thinking Cap. Hope you have a great spring, and we'll talk to you again very soon.